bist du sie aller Ehre. Was ist Wundes hier geschehen? Dass ein Magd ein Kind gebar, ihre über aller Engel Schar. Was das nicht ein Wunder gab. Er ließ sich reinen taufen, dass
This is The New Right, a podcast for the lost arts, reclaiming the literary Holy Land from the heathen. This morning, we have a special sort of impromptu call-in show. I'm here today. I forgot this part of the intro that I normally do, but I'm obviously here today with Dan.
With Dan Baltic.
But also with Isaac Simpson, who is calling in. I don't know if he wants me to dox his trip, but he is en route. Well, I won't dox your trip if you don't want me to, but you're in the car, and we're going to have a conversation on your piece. There's going to be a war in Montana, as well as current events in general, and how I kind of think your piece ties into current events. But Isaac, welcome to the show.
Hi,
Welcome, Isaac.
and yeah, you can
Good to have you back.
You can dox me. I'm driving from St. Louis to Chicago right now. I'm about 45 minutes outside of Chicago.
Awesome. Yeah, no, we wanted to sort of, you had a piece on your Substack. There's going to be a war in Montana that went kind of viral. Do you want to just, I guess, to hop right in the conversation, you want to kind of talk about how that piece came to be, what's it about, and maybe get into some of the backlash you got?
Yeah, sure. So the piece is called "There's Going to Be a War in Montana." I really struggled with that title. I struggled with the piece, actually. I was about to publish a very different version of it, and I showed it to my wife, who I always show my work to before I publish it. And she didn't like it, how it was, and I think she had some good points. So I sort of woke up at 6 a.m. the next morning and just wrote nonstop until like 3 p.m. that day and just published it.
Yeah.
Nice.
And
that's how you got to do it.
I wasn't, I like literally didn't even get up. I think I went to the bathroom one time because I was just like kind of in the zone. And the title just came out of me. It was like, that's what I wanted to call it, even from the very beginning when I was sort of conceiving of it. And it was just like, I was messing with it. I was trying to title it other things. And then I was just like, you know what, this is what I want to call it. So that's what I called it. And I published it. And within like 20 minutes or something, I got a message from Delicious Tacos being like, holy shit, this piece is really good.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, you know, it's going to get a couple thousand views, you know, like my best piece is like the Hype Dad piece got, you know, maybe 5,000 or 6,000. And I was like, okay, it'll be in that category or whatever. And then boom, it just totally exploded.
Yeah.
And it got put on the front of Revolver News, which got a ton of traffic, and it, was republished in a few newspapers in Western states
Awesome.
like Colorado and so yeah, it was great. It was really awesome. And then most of the feedback was good. Most of the feedback was great, but some of the feedback, of course, inevitably was quite bad. So I think it was controversial, but hey, you know, that's what
Yeah. Well, it's obviously
so.
got a, I wouldn't call it clickbait because that would be to disparage it, but you know, it's got a title that certainly makes you want to click on it. It's got a provocative title, shall we say. And I, of course, and Dan we've both read the piece, and it is very good. I'm not surprised that Tacos gave you the shout out, because before even getting into the intellectual and political stuff, which I do think there's some fascinating points you make that we'll get into, it is just a really good piece of writing, very descriptive. It came out of a trip you and your wife had taken to Montana. So it's the kind of gonzo journalism that you're basically doing these days, would you say?
Yes, that's exactly right. That's what I want to shift focus over to is based vice.
Yeah.
And
There we go.
I think
I love it.
that's the stuff that I like to read the most. I just published this 4-part sort of treatise on advertising, which I think is nice, and I think it's good to have that out there. But what I like to read is great gonzo journalism, and so that's what I want to write and
Yeah.
create.
Matt and I had taken to calling you Gavin McGinnis 2.0. So, maybe that is a mantle you aspire to.
That's a mix.
Maybe that is not a mantle you aspire to.
Right. But certainly Gavin, with Vice and everything, obviously, say what you will about his judiciousness with regard to certain decisions he's made. He definitely did encapsulate that, Vice 1.0 was very much, he was one of the founders of course, and then later, got kind of based. So I don't know if Gavin McGinnis is
to be clear, early Gavin McGinnis, not his later transformations. The comparison was to him as a gonzo journalist, not as a PV founder.
or someone who would fake their own arrest on air, but
or that.
Yeah. No, again, it is a really well-written piece. I would recommend it to anyone who's listening if they haven't read it. Sorry, what was I going to say? 1 second, let me pull my notes. The newspapers that picked it up, were they more, so obviously Revolver is a basically right-wing news aggregator, but a lot of the papers that picked it up were just kind of more local newspapers, right?
Yeah, so it got picked up 2 places. I actually don't remember the name of either of them right now, but they were both
like an Idaho paper, if I recall.
Yeah, I think one was Idaho, one was Colorado, and they were both like-minded gentlemen who run newspapers in those places who hit me up, and they were like, "Yeah, we got to publish this."
Yeah,
and
awesome.
I was like, "Go for it."
Well, one of the things that you said to me, encouraging me to read it, because I kind of missed the initial boat because I kind of go in and out of Twitter sometimes, was that basically that this is kind of a white pill for kind of your general project of trying to create this sort of based gonzo journalism, but kind of for all of us, a rising tide raises all ships. Any of us trying to kind of delve into this more independent, journalism, podcasting, gonzo or otherwise, this kind of proves that there is an audience out there for it beyond our corner of Twitter.
Totally. Yeah. And let me just say that I don't want to get completely away from seeing things through the lens of propaganda. So I've been in advertising for 10 years. That's always going to be a part of the way that I see things. And the Carousel, my podcast and my Substack, is still about seeing the world through propaganda. And the Montana piece is about propaganda. It's about the sort of Cold War of messaging that you're seeing inside a place like Bozeman and then outside of there in a place like Three Forks, Montana, which is hot red, bright, angry Trump country versus gay, rainbow, private equity, hazy IPA, spicy rigatoni, live, play, work, hedge fund land.
Yeah.
And you see these two opposing forces. The war I'm in part mentioning is a cold one. It's a messaging one. You see the signs and symbols of these two opposing groups ramped up to a fever pitch.
Yeah.
And so the piece is still about propaganda. It's still about the messaging that we see and the music and the advertising and the bumper stickers. It's still about that. And that's really how I see the world. So I'm not leaving that entirely. I also run an agency, a small advertising branding agency that tries to hire kind of based guys to do work on brands. So, that's still a part of what I stand for and still part of what I'm doing. But I do think that the reason it succeeded is because there is just a massive gaping hole in culture where Vice used to be, where Bourdain used to be. Not that Bourdain was based, because he wasn't, but
I know
he was fulfilling, even if without the base part, even if it's not right wing,
Still
there's
Gonzo.
still this massive gap where there's nobody on the ground really telling the story from a subjective point of view. And I think that there's just a craving for that.
Absolutely.
We
need like a real objective. Oh, go on, Matt.
Subjectivity in general is kind of one of the things that's been in the crosshairs. I don't even want to call it PC culture or cancel culture. These are overused terms, although very real. One of the things that's in the crosshairs of whatever crackdown has happened over the past 10 years is yes, it's a crackdown on right-wing points of view, absolutely, but it is also an affront and assault on any kind of subjective take because it is universal. So even if your subjective take is somewhat leftist tinged, it still doesn't quite jive with the kind of corporate universalist approved messaging that increasingly is becoming the only acceptable thing. So your point is well taken. It's a based versus non-based issue, but also it's a subjective actually responding to the world versus corporate fear fear mongering, like, oh my god, is this opinion going to get me canceled culture? You know what I mean?
Totally.
Yeah, like
I think that there's
versus
No, sorry, Dan, go ahead.
No. I mean, like, honest, it's the same thing as in art. Outside of the regime sanctioned area, what have you, you are free to actually express yourself. And thus, both good art is coming from outside of the GAE occupied zones, shall we say. Also, I would assume good advertising, good journalism has to come from outside of the New York Times newsroom, because even though the New York Times is technically very good, it's all so compromised ideologically that you can't even, it's very, the way I would describe the Times is it's very sophisticated, very well executed propaganda. And that's and to an extent that has always been true, but I think that's increasingly true today. And so now what you need a counterbalance to that. And you need a true counterbalance, because the Wall Street Journal is just another version of the New York Times. You need what you are doing, which is gonzo journalism, going out there and telling the stories as you see them. And one of the things, Isaac, that I thought was interesting here is you got a lot of pushback from people after publishing this. And it's surprising to me, because it seemed like the biggest complaint people had was that you were catastrophizing, that that a civil war is not imminent. Yet, I mean, this is something that everyone talks about. So it seemed like a perfectly reasonable gloss on the issue.
Yeah, so let me respond in two ways. First of all, I think the first point that you're both making about subjectivity being needed is a really important one. And I think that is such a peg that we should all be focusing on, because you're right that the powers that be are terrified of subjectivity. A great example of this is you see what's happening with homelessness and vagrancy in all the big cities, right? And crime. So it's very obvious in a subjective sense for anyone who lives in any of these cities that there's been a horrible change.
Mm-hmm.
That neighborhoods have gotten destroyed. There's way more people on the streets. There's way more crime. It's just deteriorating. That's very obvious. I've lived in LA for 11 years. It's like night and day from when I got there. It's so much worse. But what do the experts say? The experts say, oh, it's not actually worse. People from San Francisco say this all the time. They say, oh, the crime hasn't changed. This is all in your head. This is all just, oh, you're just racist. So you're just seeing more black people, so therefore there's more crime. You're not actually seeing that the streets are now completely destroyed. You're not seeing that. That's not real. That's how it's always been. It's a city, man. It's a city. Welcome to living in a city. So they're trying to tell us that our subjective eyes do not know the truth. And that who knows the truth is their experts, their numbers. Their data says the crime is not up. Even though we all know it's very obvious to everybody, and that's why every local election in California is 100% about homelessness now, even though the experts tell us that it's not actually happening. So I think the point you're making about the need for more speaking about what we're seeing in front of our eyes is necessary. Secondly, let's talk about the Montana piece and the feedback. So, or the criticism. So the criticism, I think the best lens to see through is this guy named Walter Kern, who is in our circle. He's a famous writer. He wrote the book of Up in the Air that got turned into a movie. He wrote a book called Thumbsucker. I had no idea who he was before this, but he's got like 100,000 followers, and he came and just attacked me really strongly out of nowhere on Twitter and called me a fraud. I mean, I called him a boomer back, to be fair, but it was, he really was very angry about this piece. I was surprised.
He's a native Montanan, yeah?
I don't know if he's a native one, but he lives there now.
Okay.
He lives in Montana, so I don't know if he's native or not.
Whatever, personally, but go on, sorry.
I think so, too. So his criticism, which he retweeted actually last week, I have a tweet here from Michael Tracy, who's another, based in quotes, writer, journalist, who's supposedly on our side. But what Michael Tracy had to say that Walter Kern retweeted was not a new observation, but the people who are perpetually convinced of a looming civil war just spend way too much time online. Go anywhere in America that's remotely normal, and the idea that the population is readying itself for a cataclysmic internal conflict is beyond ridiculous. So this is what this camp of more moderate-y type people have to say. They think that a hot conflict is beyond ridiculous. They love this rhetoric. Beyond absurd. It's beyond. So the question is, why do they think this? Why are they saying this? I have no idea why they don't see this clearly, because 600 miles away to the west from Bozeman, Montana, is Seattle. In Seattle, a year ago, not 2 years ago, a group of dissidents with guns took over the most valuable part of downtown for months on end. People died. There was all kinds of violence. Residents were terrified in their homes. That was a war, right? That was certainly a conflict, exactly like what they're saying. So why is it so completely beyond ridiculous to imagine that 600 miles to the east of there would be an equal and opposite reaction from the right? Why is that beyond ridiculous? We have all of our media people saying, "Oh, there was an insurrection in D.C." So that's a war. An insurrection is a war. Obviously, I don't think that was an insurrection. It was just a bunch of trolls, right? I don't believe that. But still, it's in the very common discourse. It's in the common parlance. So, to respond to this piece with that type of fear-based reaction, to me, it's telling me that these guys, these sort of like bourgeois-based guys, they're interacting with their sort of service people, like their service workers. And their service workers are really nice. And, the guy in Bozeman who does my yard, he's a Trump supporter, but he's really nice. And they're thinking that could never happen. Those people don't hate me. That we're all together. This is normal. And they're just not seeing the anger that's there. They're just not listening, Yeah. And I think because they think that they're one of the good ones or something. But the absurdity of their response to say that something like this is beyond ridiculous, I just don't understand it. Because to me, it seems like it's very obviously we're on the way to that. I'm not saying we're on the way to an organized civil war, obviously. The title is a play on the rhetoric of actually a Washington Post article that's saying there's going to be a civil war. And again, it's gonzo, it's subjective. But even if it wasn't gonzo and subjective, even if it was me literally saying there is actually going to be a war, right? There's actually going to be a hot, violent physical conflict in a place like Montana. Even if I was saying that, I don't understand why that would be beyond the pale of imagination. Like, certainly the sides are mad enough at each other.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at it, they hate each other. It just seems like you would need one little thing, and it would bubble over at least into a Chaz Chop type situation. So that's my response.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, this is something that Matt and I have talked about, and indeed that the culture is talking about. So number one, it's crazy that people got worked up about this article, because the same article has been in the Washington Post, has been in the New York Times, has been, so I don't know. I think, people just like to start fights, I guess. I don't know. But beyond that part, yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely right that going into the future, as things continue to get more and more tense and hostile between the two, essentially two camps in America, yeah, you're going to see more events like the Chaz, more kind of street fighting, street
January
warfare,
6th,
but more January 6th type stuff, more riots, more this and that. But I mean, I think it would be very difficult to imagine an actual civil war in the sense of armies fighting each other, because, and Matt and I have discussed this, many people have discussed this, the good old boys have discussed this extensively, how due to geographic distribution, there's no longer like a Mason-Dixon line where, well, you can fight the guys down there and we can fight the guys up there. Rather, people are congregated in cities, and they are the blue team and the red team are outside of the city. So we're all mixed up amongst each other in this country. So that makes coordination into some sort of, martial, action very difficult. So, yeah, no, I don't think that's one reason there wouldn't be a civil war. Another reason is America today is just way, way more precarious, actually, than it was during the Civil War. America today has way many more people. Supply lines are stretched extremely thin and rely upon all these, as we've seen with the supply chain disruptions. The slightest little problem causes oh yeah, you're not going to get your food for 3 more days. Oh, you're not going to get heat for, whatever amount of time. So we rely upon these kind of super efficient, but once disturbed, extremely inefficient supply lines. And if there were a prolonged actual civil conflict in the continental United States, that would just go to shit immediately. There'd be no supply. Who the truckers are, the red guys. So they're not going to truck to the cities. It just is not going to work. So within a month of any sort of if there were an actual civil conflict, the cities would be dark. Cities wouldn't have food. People would, they'd be dying. And though a lot of people would be. And the spirit to keep this going, among, presumably any sort of conflict would be basically the blues saying we need to impose our values on the reds. And I think what would happen would be the blues, who would be suffering massively in the cities and on the coasts, would say, yeah, we don't fucking care. Stop this shit. I need to get food. And that's what would happen in my estimation. Plus, there's a lot of, our electrical grid, as I'm sure you realize, is extremely vulnerable. All someone, as Mike Ma has taught us, all someone would need to do is find these 3 power plants that power the East Coast, and there'd be quite a bit of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So a hot war, not going to happen. A kind of prolonged civil conflict, which is simmering, but cold, warm. That I could see happening.
I mean, I think that already is happening to an extent.
Yeah.
Isaac, I don't know if you have anything to respond to on that note, but I mean, what I would say is striking is I more or less agree with everything you say, Dan. At the same time, I think as it was really highlighted in Isaac's piece, despite these geographic issues, which are again I for the record don't think there'll be anything that could really be called a civil war that's going to happen, but I do think that the feelings, that the anger is certainly hot enough, to perhaps even hotter than it was during the actual Civil War in many regards, and I think that we're kind of reaching this breaking point with regard to Trumpism, tying in with national events, Mar-a-Lago, the Dark Brandon speech, some of these other things we want to talk about too, where I don't want to say it's do or die in a Fed posty way at all, because I'm not signaling for this, just that those are the stakes, as to put it in the words of Michael Anton, like there's not going to be a compromise, and there's no, or maybe there will be, but but not without an extremely sort of ugly, without, there may eventually be a compromise if someone like Ron DeSantis gets in and maybe things will calm down or something, maybe, but before that it's going to get a lot uglier is my general take, because there's no compromising. I mean, I think within our lifetime, I don't know exactly how it will go down, but like a Trump flag will be regarded the same as a Confederate flag.
Right. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that there's not going to be a traditional, two armies civil war, but that type of war doesn't really exist anymore anywhere. I mean, Russia, Ukraine is probably the most traditional war we've had in a long time, where there's actually two armies. But even that one's kind of dubious. I would say, but no, I agree with both of you. I'm not saying that there's going to be two sides. It's going to be the Trumps versus the Bidens, and that's the war. I'm much more talking about a conflict of some kind that you're saying. I mean, it's already happening. It's trucker convoy. It's what happened in the Netherlands. I mean, we already see these things happen, right? And so the bubbles are happening. It's bubbling. It's definitely bubbling. One thing that I thought was interesting about what you said, in speaking of bubbles, is that there's no Mason-Dixon. So I would actually say there is a Mason-Dixon. It's just decentralized. So we're living in the age of decentralization, right? Right.
It's diffused.
There's a very clear divide that is forming, that's really brand new, between city and country. Of course, that divide has always existed, but that divide used to be pretty like, oh, it's the city mouse and the country mouse. It's those nice country people and those kind of like, oddball city people, and they don't really like each other, but whatever, they kind of have fun. Now, the country people and the city people absolutely hate each other. And so, I was just driving through rural Missouri. I went to a bar. It the same pattern as Montana. I went to a bar that I do this thing. I just look on my Google Maps and I just put in bar, and I see whatever's around me. So the bars that I end up going to are places that aren't they're kind of out of the way. So I went to this bar that's kind of out of the way. I walk in, there's a Patriot Front sticker on the door, right?
Wow.
Which is Patriot Front. I believe it's known as straight up white supremacist group.
Yeah, it's
and
based.
And I go in and it's a bunch of dudes glare at me with straight up I don't even know what you call the beards that are, there's no mustache, it's really long and gray. It's the racist beard. I'm pretty chameleon-y, so I think I was fine. But I went in and had a Busch Light and just kind of soaked it up. People smoking cigarettes in there. I mean, that place is basically that place wasn't Patriot Front 10 years ago. Those guys weren't in there. You really do see it. If you go into these country places, at least the right ones, at least the poor ones, the anger, it's there now. They are
no
organized.
doubt, yeah.
I don't know how organized they are, but they're definitely there's a very clear delineation. And then you go 45 minutes away into St. Louis, and St. Louis is looks like, I don't even know how to describe it. It literally, I stayed in this hotel last night, all night long, just yelling, loud bass. It's all black on the streets. Like,
Oh yeah, I've heard very bad things about
and
St.
this is
Louis.
like the nice part. Yeah, this is like the nice part of St. Louis. St. Louis has always been like that. So I don't want to say that St. Louis is like now St. Louis is like that, because everybody will be like, no, St. Louis has always been, very diverse. But I think it's definitely like the downtown is just abandoned now. So
Yeah.
again, that's not like Bozeman where it's like gay Candyland, but it's still an example of just a really very sharp divide between the cities and the countries and the country. And I think that's where the Mason-Dixon is. It just is happening everywhere. And technology does such a good job of dividing us and such a good job of making us so we can't ever actually get together, that we're seeing, decentralized armies forming, not armies, but decentralized sort of populations forming. And the answer to that is, of course, using the internet to organize. But these guys can't do that. The hard extremist people on the right, who I'm not saying I support, I'm just calling it how I see it, by the way. Again, I'm just saying what I see.
Mm-hmm.
These guys can't organize, because the second they organize, they're deplatformed, or they're, some narc infiltrates, and they're totally done, right? I mean, anytime the slightest bit of right-wing organizing goes on, it's instantly smashed out, because just surveillance.
Because they go to the bank and discover they have a zero balance.
Exactly. Look at a guy like Cody Wilson, right? Cody Wilson.
Oh wow, my money's gone.
Yeah, right. No, and that's what
I
they
think
do.
I'm
The credit
going to become more politically normal.
Yeah, right. No, what's the list that they have? There's a great Cody Wilson talks about this. He woke up one day and all his credit cards didn't work. Cody Wilson's the guy behind the ghost.
Yeah, the 3D.
He was like,
ghost guy.
Yeah, 3D ghost. He was like, I woke up one day and suddenly I was on. There's like a list out there, and when you're on the list, none of your bank accounts work, none of your credit cards work, and he had to figure out a way around it.
That is a perfect way to combat this, because if you're cut off from the banking system, well, you're fucked. Like, the best you can do is work under the table and, get paid off the books. And you can scrape together a living that way, maybe. And you're not going to make a lot of money, though. You're not going to make any money. You're not going to make enough money, like, if you want to own a home, if you want to even have, like, a decent apartment or rent a decent house, have anything approximating a decent life, you need a bank. And if you can't access any bank, if you can't access any credit, you're as good as dead, basically.
Yeah, I mean, this is
why
I get kind of black-pilled about this sort of thing, is that I think that the anger is absolutely there for a war-type scenario, and for people to want to stand up for themselves. But I worry that, anyone who would do that, they kind of have them surrounded on all sides. And I really think the project right now is to humiliate Trump and humiliate anyone who voted for him, and that's what the ugliness is going to be over these next few years. Again, maybe a best case scenario is that someone like DeSantis ends up getting in, can win over some independent voters, and things sort of calm down. Although from a harder right perspective, that would kind of just be placating without, in a bigger picture way.
More of the same.
The decline would still kind of continue, but at least people, wouldn't be getting arrested. But I kind of see that, that's part of why I'm skeptical of a real civil war happening. I think people realize that they're cornered and more or less hopeless in the face of the government, the banking system, the media, everything against them. Because that would also be different. The last Civil War, there was actually different institutions heading off. In this case, I think it's more of a vulnerable population that is being edged out.
Well, it's certainly not hopeless. I mean, if DeSantis gets in, we're really not at all far away from this whole thing getting resolved. If DeSantis gets in and he stays true to his promise of removing the deep state, of basically firing every single one of these partisan fucking, hacks, progressive Ivy League hacks that occupies and controls the budgets of these public-private partnerships, if he actually removes all those people and puts in base people, America will have survived, right? We'll look back at this and we'll say, oh, damn, that was kind of like McCarthyism, those commies. They almost took over. That was bad. America will make it, and the Constitution will remain intact. Democracy will have actually worked, right? If the guy like DeSantis can get in and actually wipes out this horrible, rotten group that is destroying everything. So I think that's probably what's going to happen. Actually.
Yeah. You have a good amount of hope in DeSantis then.
Well, I think if we can get DeSantis in there, which I think there's a really good chance we can do, the wave will break and will flow back the other direction, and America will have had another close call, and we'll all look back at this time as a terrible time, but one that we made it through, right? I think, if I was a betting person, that's what I guess will happen. But if
my pushback on that would be, I don't know that you can get rid of the national security state without, I don't know if someone like DeSantis can really do that, because he's part of that system. He's, these are kind of like, some his donors are more people who are establishment types. And truly, I think if to kind of bring America into an America first policy position with restricted immigration, with rolling back a lot of these civil rights laws, you would need to purge the national security state. You would need to kind of really end the administrative state. You need to do a sort of very fast, very massive purge of all of these people, and not to put that in a Fed posty way, just, to fire them, to, as Yarvin would put it, permanently retire government employees. And I mean, that would be a kind of something which would face incredible pushback. And I don't know that DeSantis is the guy who can do that. But maybe he is. Maybe I hope he is. Because I think that's one of the reasons why they are investigating Trump now. One of the reasons why they, did whatever they did in 2020, which resulted in the election outcome that we, are now honoring. They realized that Trump posed an existential threat to their way of life. And
I guess that's my one.
Such.
Yeah, go on.
Go on, man.
No, I don't know if it's necessarily pushback on what you're saying, Isaac. I have noted, and I wonder, I'm curious what your take on this is. It doesn't seem like the mainstream really fears DeSantis. They will say bad things about him, especially with regard to sort of more social issues, but it seems like they don't view him as the same existential threat that they view Trump as. And, maybe they don't know their own enemy, and he really could do the sort of best possible version of what you said he might. But I haven't, it does seem like there's a little bit of, just compared to Trump, that they don't really fear him. And I wonder if that's meaningful.
Exactly. And I can, give an anecdote that describes this quite well. I was at a party recently with young conservatives, a mix of more kind of base types and more conservicons. And so I was talking to these conservicon types, and they were like, oh, yeah, we love Ron DeSantis. And they're like, Trump would be a disaster, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just clear to me that, and then we got on to deeper issues, and they are not on board with the, more DR agenda, of course. And we're, frankly, a little horrified by it. So, if this is the typical DeSantis supporter, then I don't know how much our goals will be achieved by a DeSantis administration, but we'll see.
So I believe DeSantis has said that he would do a purge, of the deep state. I think he's said that.
Okay.
Hasn't he? Yeah. So I think he's
very well. He
with
may
that.
have.
Yeah. So I read there's a New Yorker. The New Yorker, of course, tried to do a hit piece on DeSantis, to get out in front of it. And it's actually a good piece. And I think they try and get him on COVID bullshit, right? They're trying to be like, oh, more people died, which they didn't because of his policies. So that's what they're trying to like hang him up on, but it doesn't work at all. Instead, what that piece just shows in DeSantis is he's not super charismatic. He's an Ivy League guy, very understated, but very based and a total operator. So, and I think he has made this promise of this deep state thing. So I think all the things you're saying about him not triggering the hysterical left, that's actually a strength.
Okay. I hear you.
Left gets so triggered by Trump and try and put him in jail. Trump is just a triggering guy, right? I mean, most of the people with big opinions on Trump,
for sure.
Most of the people with big opinions on Trump aren't responding to anything besides a visceral, emotional reaction to the way he acts.
Yeah, absolutely.
So DeSantis just isn't like that. Like you look at DeSantis talk, he's just not super triggering. He's just kind of, he's kind of droll, and he says really base stuff though. So I think actually DeSantis is very much our guy. All that said, all these things you're saying about the backlash and the machinations of power and just the ability to even do this, I completely agree. I think that that's a massive risk. I'm not at all sure that DeSantis is the solution or that he even can get in without them figuring out some way to keep him out of there. So I don't know. I really don't know. All I'm saying is I think that if DeSantis were to get in, and if he were to keep true on his promise of generally making these horrible administrative state people pay, I think that we'd be in pretty good shape as a country.
Well, one thing I've been saying recently that I'm a little bit politically black-pilled, and that comes and goes. But I would love to be wrong, and I think that you've made a good case that for Ron DeSantis today, like. My whole point is like, oh, they seem not to fear DeSantis by doing so much against Trump as they've been doing recently with Mar-a-Lago, et cetera. It's almost like they want DeSantis to get in, but that's probably to give them too much credit. I don't think they're actually playing that level of 4D chess. I think you're probably right that it is just this visceral reaction to Trump. Yes, they view him as an existential threat, but it's not so much that they view him. Maybe it's not so much that they view him so much more as an existential threat than DeSantis, as that they just really hate him, and they hate him for as Bap kind of has pointed out, like they hate him for how he's humiliated them. Which I do think DeSantis is substantially right wing, but he hasn't yet anyway sort of kept them up at night in the way that Trump did. And maybe this is all much more gut level. Below the belt punching than it is 4D chess to topple, the American demographic.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? We're always going back and forth on this. It's sometimes, I totally agree with Bap, where I'm like, these people are just actually very kind of mediocre, embarrassed people who aren't really very good at much. They can't really get people into their candidates. They can't really, everything is focus grouped, and it just doesn't work. And then a guy like Trump comes along and does everything they want to do. He stands for the common people. He does it on pure charisma. He's everything that they want to be. And they are just so mad about it. They just can't believe that all their Ivy League degrees, all doing the right thing, all the things they've done correct, and this guy who works, 4 hours a day comes along and just completely, just by sheer force of will, completely destroys them all, and not only that, represents the common man, which is really, since they're communists in their soul, that's what they want. So,
I think crucially,
that could be it.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, no,
All
I was
going
going
to
to say crucially. Go on. I'm sorry. Isaac shouldn't be cutting in.
Sorry. Let me just say the end of the point. All I was trying to say is either it's that, and we're pretty much in good shape because they suck, or then sometimes something happens where I think they are playing 7D chess, and they really have a plan that is just impenetrable, and there's just no way to get free of this. So I kind of go back and forth. Sorry, Dan. Go ahead.
So crucially, I think what really distinguished Trump is that he, unlike any of the other candidates in 2016, was offering policy positions that spoke to there are many words for him, but the Amerikaner. And that is a demographic that had, by the Republican Party, been systemically ignored and even denigrated. And so, Trump pursued, I'm sure he didn't consciously know he was doing it, but he pursued the quote unquote sailor strategy. And guess what? It works because, certain people united by certain details about their lives and themselves will feel they have common interests because they do. And so that was something he injected into American politics that I think the establishment, the Republican and certainly the Democratic establishment, want to roll back as much as they can. They want to, they want to put the genie back in the bottle, but that's not happening.
Right.
And so I think that's one of the reasons that Trump represents such a threat to that regime. But also, as you said, as you see, DeSantis, he's speaking that language too now. And Blake Masters certainly is.
True. And
I don't think the genie can go back in the bottle. And I think eventually we're going to find a leader who is, doesn't trigger the disgust, whatever in the minds of independent voters that Trump does. And then we'll be in business. And
I think, I agree. And I'll say that I'm not trying to anything I've said, about having my doubts that DeSantis is as based as we hope. He's a great political candidate. He's young. He's very sort of masculine in his demeanor. He would be an excellent foil, whether it's Biden or whatever other person they try and slip through the cracks, Kamala, whatever. He would be an excellent foil. And I mean, I really think he could win in 2024, and I like him a lot. And I think there is a potential white pill there. I do wonder sort of what the bigger picture of where this is all heading, and whether or not he would be just kind of more of a populist salve on a bigger problem, but wouldn't necessarily eradicate the problem. That being said, I'm not someone who thinks that Trump would necessarily save the day either. I think that right now he represents the kind of the hottest red sort of flame of populist rage, and therefore, in some way a more fearsome force than DeSantis. But I'm not necessarily saying that there's a clear path to victory if Trump were president either.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
So I'm not sure, but but no, there's different dynamics at play here. Isaac, I know you are probably arriving in Chicago pretty soon, so I don't know if we should wrap up, but I can definitely keep going.
No, let's keep going. I've got maybe 20 minutes or so.
Okay, great.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I'm enjoying this.
Well, just to kind of tap out some notes here that I'd taken that sort of brings both segments of this conversation together, the feasibility or lack thereof of any kind of localized or national civil war, but also dynamics with Trump, et cetera. One thing that's been, black pill is a strong word, but one thing that I've been noticing recently in headlines is this notion that the general public normies, so to speak. So not, sorry, I don't know if you guys can hear that truck in the background. So not necessarily like the blue elites, and not necessarily like the Americana or like deep reds, like Isaac, you were describing the bar earlier, but just your average normie people who are somewhere in between, independent voters and even a bigger block than that. Seems like they are very, and I guess they've always been, but maybe even more so now, are turned off by Trump. The stuff with Mar-a-Lago, you hear, I think people like BAP and others on the sort of dissident right have talked about this. Your average, especially just like white American views, if you're in trouble with the law, you probably deserve it. Like that's which people from the East Bloc, etc., don't view it that way. But your average American, basically thinks that if you're on trial, if you're arrested, you probably deserve it at least a bit. And it seems like that perception is carrying through with Trump. And by the way, I really don't know that much about the case. He may well have done things that were illegal, and they probably were avoidable, which is somewhat depressing. But anyway, it does seem like, and so what I'm dancing around here is that independent voters are shifting away from not only from Trump, but from the GOP in general, heading towards the midterm. Again, this is the mainstream media narrative. Maybe it's exaggerated, but very much it's like the headlines have been that, Trump's perception is kind of going down. And people are shifting away from the GOP due to recent headlines on Trump. This sort of, again, blackpilling is a strong word, but this makes me nervous heading into the midterm. So I'm curious kind of for both of your thoughts on that. And then I kind of had a structural point to make. Let's start with that. I mean, do you think this mainstream media narrative about voters drifting away from the GOP is exaggerated, or just about these dynamics in general?
I mean, I don't know a single person who is like sitting around not having an opinion on Trump that isn't already 100% baked one way or the other. Like, what voter out there is like, oh, I'm not really quite sure how I feel about Trump.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's like either you're going to vote for him or not. That's pretty much it. I don't think there's anyone out there that's still making up their mind. Because, if you're someone who would vote for Trump, you obviously see this as a political attack, which it is. And if you see, Hillary had private servers. She never got arrested, right? It's the same fucking thing.
Yeah.
I think it's stupid either way. I mean, I thought it was stupid with Hillary's servers too, to be honest. I didn't give a shit about her servers, who cares? So, I don't think there's anybody out there who's still making their mind up about Trump. So if the media is trying to tell us that, people are, they're not sure, the FBI, he must be doing something wrong, I think that's very much wishful thinking. It's very untrue. I mean, have you ever heard of anybody like in today's world being like, oh, you know what? I really wasn't sure until the FBI raided his house. Right? Does that person exist? Maybe. I haven't.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know anyone like that, but part of me wonders if, yes, I don't know. You never know with normies, but yeah.
I think you're generally right, Isaac. I think that, everything with Trump, both sides are really baked in 100% at this point. One interesting thing that came up after the FBI raid is both from the left and from the right, at least from the conservicon right, there was the sense of like, well, let's wait, let's see what they have. Let's, and oh boy, if they overstepped, they're going to be in trouble because that will disgrace their credibility. And it's this fundamental misapprehension. And I'm a lawyer, you're a lawyer. So I think like maybe we have additional insight into this. It's a misapprehension of the judicial system, the justice system, and how it is applied to people in America, depending on their level of interest the regime has in prosecuting them. So like if I'm Joe Schmo and I shoplift something in San Francisco, I'm not even going to be prosecuted because they've made a policy decision not to prosecute me. So like that's one level. If I'm like Dan Baltic and I'm embezzling money, like, yeah, I'm going to get prosecuted, but like no one is going to go like balls to the wall to make sure that I, go to prison forever. I'll have like, or, maybe I'll have a zealous prosecutor, but like in general, I'll have the opportunity to present my defense. I'll have, to the extent that I could get a fair shake in court, and it's probably to a very good extent because I could afford good attorneys. I would have, a fair shake. But those instances of, legal processes, of, events in the legal system are very, very different from the situation where you are standing in between the regime and what it wants. And if you find yourself in that position, there's nothing on earth that will save you. Obviously, law is kind of like at a certain level, they can find laws to indict you for anything. They can especially post 9/11 with all this terrorism stuff. If the government wants to, put you in forever prison, they will put you in forever prison. If the government wants to do more than that, they'll do that. And this is not even something that is debated. Like, everyone knows that there are CIA wet teams. Everyone knows that these things have and do happen. Like for instance, that interview with Chuck Schumer, where he goes, "Yeah, if I were a president, I wouldn't be picking a fight with the FBI." Or like an even better, here's like an even more kind of concrete example. I remember reading an old interview with who's that neocon, John Bolton, and he was talking to the interviewer, and he had some type of dispute with an ambassador from some other country, from I think it was a Colombian ambassador. And he, like, this was from a New Yorker reporter, I think. So it's not him saying it to the reporter, but it's the reporter reporting what he heard. Bolton, a senior member of the United States government, told this ambassador, "Oh, we know where your kids go to school." And at the senior level of operations in in regime operations, that is how disputes are settled. And that is something that I think the normie doesn't quite understand. They think due process goes up to the very top. And that's just not true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really insightful point, Dan. And it's true. Like, maybe you and I are kind of jaded because we went to law school and have experience with the legal system. So we know what you're saying, that prosecutorial decisions are really you can prosecute anybody with any severity that you want. And so that's something that you're right. Like, maybe the normie is out there thinking it's black and white. Like, if you committed a crime, then you will be prosecuted for it. Where it's like, no, it's entirely based on what they want to prosecute. And
or not even prosecute, right?
Or not prosecute. So another place you saw this recently is somebody like me was really freaked out about the IRS, the new $83 billion,
right. Oh yeah, that's
85,000 or whatever IRS people. So somebody like me is like, oh, that just means they're going to find more shit to prosecute, right? They're going to find more little reasons to audit whoever they want. Whereas I had a lot of friends that were just like, I don't get it. Why is this bad? Like, it only matters if you did something wrong. And I'm like, dude, everyone does something wrong on their taxes. Everybody does some small thing wrong. The tax code is 1,200 pages long.
Yeah, and the more
and half of them.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's another, along with Mar-a-Lago and the Dark Brandon speech, that's the other key detail of, Democrats solidifying their power. Because, as you say, they can go after anyone, but also it especially targets exactly the conservative sort of Americana demographic, independent businesses, the middle class. These are the people who are most susceptible to that.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, and that's where it seems like this is going to come out of, even though they're saying it's not. And, I wouldn't be surprised if they do go after. I mean, they already did it once, right? They went after IRS, targeted conservative 501c3s, I'm sure they're going to do that again.
Yeah, no, so that's
and all the people they're hiring are going to be woke based, diversity hires. So, who's, as they say, your paycheck, never understand something that your paycheck depends on you not understanding. They're all going to be on board with it because that's why they're there. So I think that, it's an interesting point, for sure.
Yeah. So it's power lies in the hand that wields it. So.
And that's exactly the source of, again, don't want to call it a black pill. I don't think it's hopeless. It's just that's what's kind of scary and ugly about these times, is that kind of solidification of power. But again, I will allow kind of what we've discussed. Like, yes, there could be political, if not solutions, and at least salves going forward. And I guess we have to put our hopes in those. One sort of another thing coming out of these articles I've read recently about sort of the supposedly shifting tide of independence away from the GOP towards the Dems. Some of these articles will sort of talk about the structure of the voter base in this country. And one that I found interesting, I don't have this statistic at my fingertips, but it rings true in my experience, is that about as many as 3 in 10 Americans are thought to be like Trump diehards, and then obviously however many are extremely anti-Trump, and then there's like some kind of more GOP leaning people who are like skeptical of Trump or whatever. But that kind of strikes me as an interesting sort of structural reflection. If you want to talk about is there going to be a war or not, I think that there's what the dynamic in the country right now is that there is probably I'd estimate about 3 in 10. Other people on our side would estimate more. Americans are just extremely against the kind of progressive mainstream. They view Trump as their guy, and they're angry enough, I think, for a war, but they're outnumbered, basically 7-3 or so. And therefore, that's why I don't think it's ever really going to turn into anything beyond a January 6th or a Chaz type thing, or maybe a trucker convoy type situation, is because of that fundamental, I don't know if the numbers are actually as much on Trump's side as a lot of people hoped after 2016. I guess that's not really a question. I'm just curious for your guys' take on that. Do you think that is an underball of the number of people who are Trump diehards, or what?
So what's the exact question?
Well, so supposing that about 3 in 10 Americans are Trump diehards, how to phrase this? I kind of have the sense that, almost like a plurality, not quite a plurality, but there's more people who are diehards for Trump than any other one political candidate or cause in the country, but they're still overall outnumbered. I don't know. Do you think that's
and I think not to add something that's not there in your take, but I think it is that this 3 in 10, they though are a diehard minority, possibly prevent the formation of a red majority, because the other reds are some of them are just so viscerally turned off by Trump that they side with Biden, or they side with whoever the Dems are running.
Yeah.
So
I guess
I think that
fear. Yeah. And that heading towards
that you're
that's going to be the dynamic.
Matt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were you saying,
Yep. Well, Isaac, what's your take on that?
Go ahead, Dan. Go ahead.
All right. So my take on that is, I think it's right. I think, unfortunately, I think we see a lot of stuff we like in him. Many people who are conservative, who would support. I can't tell you how many people are like, I'd support a DeSantis. I'd support a Blake Masters. And when Blake Masters is serving redder meat than Trump, and they'll support him because, he cuts a cleaner figure. He's less, he doesn't have these kind of downscale associations that the more upscale, suburb people don't want to be like, I'm with that guy the Hicks are with or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's an unfortunate situation, but I think it is perhaps the situation that we find ourselves in. But that being said, I don't think this is a black pill because, if it's not DeSantis, if it's not Blake Masters, there is tremendous energy in this area. Eventually, the right leader to coalesce behind will arise. And also, and this is something that we haven't touched on yet, but this kind of supposition that we're entering a period of the long blue winter, I don't think that's true necessarily. I think it's actually very precarious because the GAE coalition relies upon basically all Hispanics and all blacks buying into the GAE agenda. And I don't know, I think we both know a lot of Hispanic guys, a lot of black guys, or maybe not a lot, but a few, they're not particularly into GAE. And I think they would actually be very easy to pick off by a civic nationalist president who, the crucial thing is they have the sense that they have, I think, the correct sense that the Dems are going to get them the Gibbs. And the thing is, you need to have a red president, a based populist nationalist, whatever, who is going to reassure culturally conservative Hispanic and black voters that we're not going to go hyper libertarian and not have a good social welfare system. And because they rely on this, they rely on social welfare. And frankly, I think we're all kind of agreed that era of Republican politics, which is heavily libertarian, we need to jettison that, because the Republican Party represents downscale whites and hopefully downscale or mid-scale or whatever Hispanics and blacks going forward, and Asians, of course. So I mean, I think that is actually the message, the culturally conservative, somewhat economically left position. That's a winning position. And that's something that people kind of dismiss. That's something that people are like, oh, well, that'll never happen. But okay, it doesn't make sense why that would never happen. But if it did, GAE is done. It's just done. So I mean, they need a plurality. They need a majority of the country to vote for them. And if they lose that, they can't. You can cheat, but you need to be cheating within a margin of closeness. If they lose blacks and Hispanics in a big way, they're toast.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful and true. I think that you're right. Exactly what you're saying is correct about that. Those populations really do rely on that stuff. So if they get the fear that they're not going to get some of those things, then that's not good. So I think you message it two ways. I actually think you put that secondary, though. I think what you message is, because you don't want to lose the spice and the trueness of the right-wing message that I think those populations actually do respond to, which is saying, okay, you're getting the Gibbs me that, but is it good for you? No. And it obviously isn't. Because the black community is far worse now than it was in far more libertarian times. It's, I think, what do they say? The black rate of out of wedlock birth is 70%. Before the Civil Rights Act, it was 20%. So, I don't think that, I think serious leaders in the black community who aren't grifters have to admit that all of this stuff that you're getting is not helping. It's not helping the community.
Yeah.
And I think Hispanic leaders can say the same thing. So I think you have to message that, and then also message maybe secondarily the point where look, if you're really relying on these things, we're not going to take them away. And I think that's a really great point you're making, that a little bit of the more soft economic left rhetoric is needed, because right now suddenly we represent the white underclass who also relies on some of
Exactly.
the programs. So I think I think that's really smart. I mean, I've always said, like, I'm 100% pro single payer health. That would totally destroy so many of the pharma companies and just be so much better for everybody. But
Absolutely.
with regard to the other points you're making in terms of, is it 3 out of 10, et cetera, I think, so I can count 3 Ivy League friends and 2 other friends that I know, all of whom are moderate, smart guys who all say, I would never vote for Trump.
Yeah.
They've made that decision in their head, and they simply will never do it. And these are all very smart people, smart voters who they take one look at Trump and they're like, absolutely not. They don't believe in it. It's gross. It's a circus. It's TV land. It's idiocracy. So they just cannot support it.
Yeah.
All of those people are pro DeSantis. All of those people have said outwardly, I would totally vote for DeSantis. So that's really, again, going back to the subjective versus objective rhetoric, or not rhetoric, but journalism, whatever. That's really all I can say. So my thought is DeSantis is a great candidate because it's sweeping in all those people who just cannot, Trump is just not palatable enough for them. So I think the Blake Masters and the DeSantis people maybe could appeal to those people and sweep them in.
Yeah. No, I tend to agree.
Agreed.
I guess that's the hope.
Yeah, and hopefully,
before I go, did you want
to? He delivers.
Yeah. What were you saying, Isaac?
Yeah. Do you want to just touch on last thing, Dark Brandon?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
No, aesthetically,
Yeah.
etc. I mean, what is there to say? I'm sure you, as a branding guy, have some thoughts.
Well, so this I say all the time. The thing that you have to remember about what the Biden administration is it's a bunch of Harvard grads who are fueled on Adderall, and they're basically running it like a writer's room in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A bunch of these guys sit around, they read all day, they work 14 hours a day. They're known for doing this. They go to, gay, non-binary orgies at night. I know some of these people. I know. This is what that guy was talking to, the wheelchair guy, who then, he mentioned this and then he got totally destroyed because both sides are like this. Both sides are dominated by these kind of power-hungry hedonists who just, even the Trump people who do a ton of coke and do a bunch of drugs and really work hard, play hard. They're kind of like banker-type power people, like Roger Stone-type people, right?
Yeah.
So
the Shake Shack perverts.
Right. I don't know what they. So these people run their lives in a certain way. They have accepted the Saul Alinsky way of being, and even some of the most base people, are obsessed with Saul Alinsky. Saul Alinsky was a political strategist who basically took the rails off of political maneuvering and propaganda, and he set out these rules. Hillary Clinton wrote her whole treatise on Saul Alinsky. He basically has these very complicated rules of how to create propaganda that embarrasses and undermines your opponent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Once you read it, you understand that pretty much all the people in DC are doing is sitting around in these writers' rooms, finding out ways to back and forth on this, right?
Yeah.
And they're all reading the same stuff we're reading. They're all reading Bronze Age Pervert. They know about Dark MAGA. They know about Masters. They know about these guys. So they're all in the same mind space as we are. It's so that photo op of Biden that was shared by a lot of people on our side that's supposedly supposed to make him look bad. That was completely manufactured by them, in my view. I don't know that, but they're manufacturing that meme
clearly.
because, and they have the the Marines behind him. They want to. Somebody inside of that writers' room's like, oh, let's show them who's boss.
Exactly.
Let's show them who's really in control. So that's what that whole line of messaging is. Also, Bronze Age Pervert said something with typically genius of him, which was what happened with Trump, what happened with some of these other things that all kind of went in concurrence right in a row. Oh, what happened with Dugan's daughter?
Oh, yeah.
They were planning for this period, September or August of this year, for whatever reasons, probably before the midterms. to make it their end of Godfather moment. Which is so
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
And what he means by that is, in the end of the Godfather, there's this moment where all the enemies of Don Corleone get fucked at once. They all get killed. Like, he wipes the plate with all the people that have been hurting him. He kills them all in one
Right. Yeah,
final
and the
scene.
Alex
Sorry for the spoilers.
Jones, Sandy Hook thing, part and parcel. Go on.
Yes,
Crucially,
exactly. So there's been
the day where we take care of all family business. I love that line.
Yeah, exactly. It's the family business. All the business is canceled today. I think they really did have this period that was designed to be that. They were like, we're going to, it's going to all come at once. They've been planning all these little things at once, right? Mm-hmm. And they think, and then we're going to have the dark Brandon image and show them that, it's ours. This country's ours. And all these, they are so terrified of Trump supporters. Their whole dance is the fact that Trump supporters are living in their minds at all times. And the reason Trump supporters are living in their minds at all times is because, again, these people think they're progressive. They have a project of helping the little guy. So Trump supporters remind them constantly that, in fact, they do not stand for the little guy. So it drives them insane. They go crazy. And I think that that's kind of what Dark Brandon is this punctuation point at the end of this series of big Biden wins. And that's probably also what you're seeing in terms of these fake news stories about how, the arrest really changed people's minds. And, it's not going to be a red wave, et cetera. I think this is all a coordinated PR effort that was kind of designed and built to occur at this time. So I don't think there's any dark Brandon besides these dorks, in DC who are communicating basically with us, right? I mean, they're all reading American Mind. These guys are all, they know that what we have is so much more authentically.
There's more energy.
Yeah. Charismatic.
More energy.
Yeah, it's real. It's real, right? Everything about Trump is real. Everything they do is fake. They put in somebody like Kamala Harris. She gets 3% polls because she just doesn't have it. So I think that Dark Brandon is them, it's kind of their tongue. They're like, oh, look at us, we know what you're doing, and you should be afraid. And that's why I said on Twitter, I was like, you just don't pay attention. Don't share this image as if, I'm going to share this image to show you that, Biden's scary. It's like, you idiot. You really think they didn't think this out? They obviously thought out putting the lights there and the army guys behind them at this exact time. How could
which
you
is
really
why
think
it's
they're
hilarious.
that dumb? They're not that dumb. Right,
which is why they literally are just, they publicly copied our meme. And it just shows that they don't have the capacity to meme. They don't have the capacity to generate good propaganda. And this is maybe going out a bit on a limb, but I think the reason why is they're mostly women. And the right, the DR is mostly men. And, women are just not really good at propaganda. They're not good at, kind of creating images that kind of speak to the heart and soul of men and of women, because they've never had to do that evolutionarily. Women just, men approach them. They don't have to think about what do I have to say? What do I have to do to affect a change in my environment?
Absolutely.
Because
this is go on.
women are not formed biologically to do that. And so if you have a movement that is governed by women and matriarchal, it's going to have the lamest shit imaginable as its propaganda, as it does. This resistance stuff, it's fucking terrible. It's just it's slop.
I'm thinking about the new Hillary Clinton Apple Plus docuseries, Gutsy. The reviews for this just came out.
Oh my god, I didn't even know that. Gutsy.
Oh, you got to check it out. I haven't watched it in long. I don't think it's necessary to actually watch to know exactly what it's going to be like. It's basically like a feminist docuseries. They interview people like Megan Thee Stallion and others. It's her and her daughter.
Yes.
Even the I think fair to say left-leaning Hollywood Reporter and Variety, even they gave it a pretty lukewarm review. They were like, this is not that interesting. This is pretty tepid. And I saw these headlines, I was looking at reviews of things and thinking like, I can't believe how aesthetically retarded Hillary Clinton is. I mean, after a career in politics, you'd think that she would pick up on something of how to actually communicate with people, or at least say something remotely titillating. If she were just to be like the more, twisted version of herself, it would be more interesting than creating something called Gutsy and kind of, making this tepid moral point about women or whatever. But that, of course, it's actually not at all surprising that someone who spent their career in politics is aesthetically retarded. That's the norm. I'm just coming from a post-Trump perspective where I actually expect politicians to have some aesthetic sensibility or some real charisma. But as you were kind of saying, Dan, the left really doesn't have that. Whatever the gender issue is, basically that realm of the left, Biden, Clinton, it's all geriatric, very what's the word? Feminized.
It's not masculine energy. It's not young energy, and that's what we have. So, I mean, ultimately, that's a bit of a white pill, I think. I think the party with the energy that historically has been the energy used to conquer, that's probably the party that has more of a future than the party that has this kind of moribund longhouse energy. But
I agree. I mean, I think it's a long, hard road. I think there is this solidification of power, but and I'm not just saying this to end on a positive note. I do think the energy remains on our side. It's just that we are flanked, I guess, is my overall maybe conclusion based on all this.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. True.
Well,
before we close, how about the carousel? What's coming up next?
I was going to ask, guys, if you want to close out anything else you're doing beyond your excellent Montana piece you want to, promote before we close off.
Yeah, so I just finished up this 4-part series on advertising that was originally supposed to be in Palladium, but I pulled it from them because they were saying weird stuff and are actually sponsored by the WEF, literally. And I have a piece that I'm really excited about that's very gonzo about ketamine that's coming out.
Oh, yeah, you were telling me.
Today. I think that's coming out today in Raw.
Holy shit, yeah, I got to read that.
Man's World.
Oh, great.
So yeah, that's in there somewhere. Yeah, and I'll republish it on Substack. He's awesome, Raeg, and so I'm really excited about that. So that should be published on my Substack probably early next week, and you can find it in wherever Man's World is. And
awesome.
That's pretty much it. And then from there, just having I have a good podcast coming out about the founding of Dungeons and Dragons. Actually, because I talked to a games guy about that for some reason. So again, I'm trying to shift the podcast also to be more gonzo-y stories I like, just about like the world, instead of being super political. So that's what's coming up for me.
And you have been on Astral's pod recently. Everyone should check that out.
Well, actually, he was on mine, and then
I
was also on his. So his is coming out soon, so that should be out. I don't know when he's going to publish it, but that'll be out soon.
Excellent.
You're making moves, Isaac.
Yeah.
We like it.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thanks so much for coming on. Doing it while driving and everything. Really appreciate it.
No,
Thanks,
I love
Isaac.
talking to you guys. Yours is, as I always say, the most listenable podcast in our entire sphere. I always go straight to listen to new episodes. So I really love it.
Thank you,
and thanks so much for having me again.
I appreciate it.
We appreciate
Thanks for
it.
coming
Well,
on.
enjoy the rest of your travels, and we'll talk soon.